Hello, everyone, and welcome to your favorite podcast, The Manifest Tribe. We're back again. Today, I am Ugonna Emetebe Piyugo, and on set with me today, as usual, is Ifeanyi Okeke. You're welcome, PI.
Hello, sir. Good to have you again on the podcast. It's always an awesome adventure with you. You're welcome, everyone. Welcome to another awesome episode of Manifest. So, find your favorite spot, get your writing materials, and get ready for another powerful session. You're welcome.
Thank God. You're all welcome. So glad to have you in the studio with us today. Every one of you, that is. Now, today we're going to be discussing on your favorite podcast, The Manifest Tribe, which focuses entirely on reestablishing the profile of authentic masculinity. We're going to be sharing today on 5 wounds of manhood. Now, there are 5 wounds, and we're going to be dedicating an episode to each wound. Now, somebody asks, what is the wound of manhood, and what kind of title is that in the first place? Please, PI, please take us through what exactly are these wounds, and why is it necessary for us to study these wounds? How are they inimical to our progress as men? Why is it important that we have this episode?
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you once
Thank you.
again.
Thank you.
And once again, all of you are welcome. So, sir, in the previous episodes, we discussed on the 4 phases of manhood. And we observed over time that many times these faces become distorted, they become disfigured. So instead of, for example, having a king, a man that is a leader, a man that should, be a leader and all that, what you have on one end is you have a tyrant, as we already discussed, on one extreme. On the other extreme, you have a wimp, you have an abdicator, someone that doesn't take responsibility at all. We looked at the face of the servant. On one end, you have someone that is burnt out and bitter, someone that becomes a matter out of serving and serving, without any much substance inside. On the other side, you have a slacker, someone that is purely irresponsible. If we look at the face of a friend, on one hand, you have a loner. You have men that don't know how to connect with others. On the other hand, you have a betrayer. You have people that use other people. They don't know how to, they take advantage of people in relationships. Then we look at the face of the lover. So instead of having someone, like we discussed in the last episode, someone that is, we said that love is a sustained direction of the will for the good of another. Inst- Sorry, sir. Okay. I'll continue.
Yeah. Speaking about love as the sustained direction of the will towards the good of
For
another.
the good of another. So instead of having that kind of person, you have a very selfish person that doesn't think about others, that put themselves first. Then on the other end of it, you have people that are very cold and very critical. So we now said that these faces many times from our observation are usually disfigured, and there are things that cause the disfigurement of these faces, and that's what we call wounds. Wounds that create men that are struggling, that are confused, and they are disoriented. So, what is a wound? In summary, I'll just say a wound is any unresolved issue where lack of closure adversely impacts and shapes the direction and dynamics of a man's life. I'll take that again.
Please say that again. Yes.
A wound is any unresolved issue where lack of closure adversely impacts and shapes the direction and dynamics of a man's life. So these are unresolved issues in the lives of men, usually, of course, growing up and a lot of things where there has not been closure, and then these things now begin to adversely affect us that are men, and then begin to, as we say, disfigure these faces. So you see a man, it doesn't matter what you teach, it doesn't matter what you say, there's no drive, there's no energy. The guy is just there. Some are laid back. Some others are like trailer that failed brick. You stand in their way of accomplishing anything, they crush and be going. So that basically is what a wound is. unresolved issues where lack of closure adversely impacts and shapes the direction and dynamics of a man's life. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That's amazing. That's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Okay, so now we know that there are five wounds. So, like you said, a wound is any unresolved issue where a lack of closure adversely impacts and shapes the direction and the dynamics of a man's life. So, what are these five wounds? We're going to just run through the five wounds, just the names, and then today we'll tackle the first one. And in the next episode, we'll tackle the second one, and the third episode, we'll tackle the third one, and on till we finish. So, what's the first? What are these wounds? Could you just mention what these wounds are for us, please?
Okay, so the first, thank you, sir. So the first wound is the absent father wound.
The absent father wound, yes.
Absent father wound. The second wound is what is called the overbearing mother wound. It's also called the mommy boy wound, which usually is usually a direct consequence of an absent father wound. The third one is what we call the lone ranger wound. Lone ranger. People that don't know how to connect with other men. The fourth one is called the blind soul wound. The blind soul wound. And then the last one is called the heart depravity wound or the black soul wound. So basically these are the five wounds that affect men and create men that are struggling and disoriented. Thank you, sir.
Okay, so we're going to start today with the absent father wound. Afterwards, we'll go to the next episode to the overbearing mother wound. That overbearing mother wound that you call the mommy boy wound. Some people call it this. I like the way they call it. They call it the smother mother wound. Hmm?
This
The
mother,
smother mother wound. When the mother is the one that smothers this guy, to smother someone, to cover the person, to overrun the person. Yeah, I like the way that one sounds. The smother mother wound. But we're going to tackle the absent father wound today. All right. So, what is this wound? And just give us some insight into it, and then I would add some other things. Yeah.
all right, thank you, sir. Okay,
Thank you.
so the absent father wound is an ongoing emotional, social, and spiritual deficit. Ordinarily,
Powerful and
ongoing,
ongoing emotional,
yes, emotional,
social,
social,
and
and
spiritual
spiritual
deficits.
deficit. Ordinarily met in a healthy relationship with dad or a father that must not be overcome by other means. I'll take that again. Absent father wound is an ongoing emotional, social, and spiritual deficit. Ordinarily met in a healthy relationship with dad or with a father that must not be overcome by other means. So, in other words, when a child doesn't get those things, those vitamins, if you permit me to use them, from a father, these are things the child is supposed to get from a father. When a child doesn't get that from a father, they try to fill in the gap, with other things. That's what gives rise to things like drugs, and all kinds of addictions that people are using to mask the wound because this thing it turns children to things I don't know what to say. It fills them with all kinds of demons. We're looking at the statistics the other day, sir, about the children that grew up with absent fathers and we saw the devastating effects. It affects their academics, it affects their intellectual development, it affects their every area of a child's life. When a father is absent from a home, it damages a child. We can look at some of them. For example, one of them is anger and pain. On a personal level, I have shared my story several times. Growing up, I didn't have a good relationship with my all that. I grew up a very angry, very angry child, and I didn't know why I was always angry. I didn't know why. I didn't know where that pain was coming from. It was until I began to understand some of these things I realized that really many of the things I was. So my father looked me in the eye and told me you end up in the gutter. My father that gave that to me. looked at me eyeball to eyeball. I said, you end up in the gutter. So one day they'll kill you and I'll not even mock you. I'll just carry your carcass and throw it to the And when you hear that from someone that gave you life, someone that is supposed to affirm you, someone that is supposed to affirm your identity, you know, because we now found out that everything a child does, they do either for validation or from validation. You
Mm.
know,
That's a
they do
powerful one. That's a powerful one.
from a
Everything a
place of
child does, they
yes,
do
sir,
either from a
for
point of
either from a
validation or for
or for validation.
validation. That's powerful.
So
Mm,
when a father doesn't validate, is not there to
mm,
validate a child.
mm,
Let them you are useful, you are worth it, I'm proud of you, I love you, those kind of
mm,
things. He
mm,
fills the child with all kinds of things, and then they start trying to look for it. They start trying to fill up these things in different places. So you have anger and pain, you have extreme behavior, addictions, obsessions, and I might even add that it's also been proven that that's one of the causes of issues about gender dysphoria and all that, because it fills that child with a lot of confusion. So by the time I even entered school, University of Nigeria and so many years ago, I came in. I didn't know I was broken. I didn't know I was damaged, but I just didn't want to be normal. So I
mm.
would tint my hair. I was in Generation Next conference in Imo State the other day, and I was showing the young people there my old pictures. All of them were screaming. Couldn't believe it. I'll carry afro like this. I'll go and tint my hair. So I used to fix French acrylic on this that's nails, women's nails on this left hand. Met a guy many years ago. He was into all these people that do hair, nails, and stuff. It was much later I found out the guy was gay. He's late now. So a guy will fix my nails for me and tint my hair. We have these big trousers and all that. Then I found out I could dance. So I got into stage performance, we're doing all kinds of things, drinking, smoking, of course, women. But this emptiness inside of me, I just could not explain it. I didn't know where that emptiness came from. It was after I now got saved. And I remember, sir, I remember the first time I saw you, it was in Theater B. It was a
Wow.
program that I had. Yes, Theater
Now,
B.
Theatre B, for those of us listening that you might not know, Theatre B is a lecture hall in the University of Nigeria and Suka. Yeah,
Yes,
please continue.
yes.
Theatre B.
So, we were preparing for a show, actually, we were preparing for a show within that period and all that. And then one day I saw the flyer, and it was as a lady pastor used to travel with many years ago,
Yeah.
was into relationships and all that. So I went there. As a matter of fact, I was living with a lady in my room for like 2 years prior to that time. Because, crazy stuff we were doing. And I walked into that meeting. I came for that meeting because I wanted to come and hear about relationship, you know. But that first day, the P didn't come. I think they had some delays. And then it was the leaders of the different campus fellowships that preached that day. And then all of a sudden, I saw this tall, he used to be lanky, this bounced on stage, with this scars. Yeah. So I sat up him because the people I had seen in those days serving God were, people, their time would be like sword, I'm not looking very good.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I said, so guy men can serve God like this. I
Yeah.
sat up, I was sitting at the back. I sat up like this, I was watching you. And then you made a statement that has not left me for 23 years.
Mm,
Said that there are over 1 billion snowflakes that fall
mm,
every yet no two of them are exactly alike. You are talking about uniqueness, how unique each of us was. I said, wow. So do you know, I came back the following day just to hear you again.
wow.
Yes, sir. You were the only reason I came back for that session the next day.
Wow.
Who is
Wow.
this? Those words kept on ringing because I didn't know
Mm,
I was looking for meaning. I didn't know I was
mm,
looking for identity. I didn't
mm,
know what I was looking
mm,
for. I just knew
mm,
I was filled with all
mm,
kinds of pain, all kinds of anger. It
mm,
was my secondary school as we were like JS3.
mm,
I remember hitting a guy with a leg of a locker that had nail on it. The guy was bleeding, you know, and all that. So I didn't know why. It was when I now began to understand these things, I realized, I said, okay, now I understand what the problem is, you know. And then, of course, maybe later I'll talk about her because that's why this burden is in my heart because you were the one that actually helped me forgive my father. I remember
Wow.
the day you, yes,
Wow.
I don't know if you
Wow.
remember this, that journey for me. Maybe later when we start talking about the case,
Mm, mm,
we'll talk about how you helped me find
mm,
that here.
mm,
I got into all kinds of crazy, stupid things that sometimes I hear, I shudder, you know. So one day my, my father called me, was giving me advice after I finished my SSC. Father said, you know, I'm not saying you should not drink, oh, you know, but just stick to one brand. That's the advice my dad was giving. I did not say you shouldn't smoke, oh, but you
mm,
know, you must smoke, stick to one brand. You know, of course, Sunday morning, my dad would not go to church. He just
mm,
sit down. For the most part, he was not even around. For the
mm,
most, my dad
mm,
wasn't around. And
mm,
to complicate it, you know, he was an alcoholic.
mm,
So for the most part, he just disappears, comes back drunk, beats everybody and everything this way. So the moment he shows up in the house, everybody disappears. The moment he knocks on the door, there's a funny way once he shows up, all of us disappears. There's nothing like sitting in the parlor where my father is there. In Nigerian parlance, they say they don't boil you well. What are you doing inside that place?
mm. Yeah.
So all of us will just disappear inside the room, you know, go and stay with my mom and all that. So, you know, so that's basically what happens once a father is not there or physically absent. That absence can also be emotional. The man is
Mm,
not there,
mm,
but there's a disconnection.
mm,
There's no connection
mm,
between the man
mm,
and the children. He's just
mm,
there, or maybe backing orders, dishing
mm,
instructions, and that. So basically, sir, that's in a nutshell.
mm. Wow. Wow. Thank you so much for this. Thank you. Thank you. You know, um, what you're saying is not. I'm sure it's not lost on many of us listening. You know, me and most of us, because you know, especially for much of us, many of us that grew up, you know, somewhere in the 80s and all that, 90s and all, it's something we can relate to because you know I also encountered that a lot from my father, and you know he made a very very powerful point which is very strong. You know, I didn't want to accept it initially, but I find or I also found that I myself was, you know, to a large extent operating for validation. Now you said most children, you know, would either operate from a place of validation or for validation, you know. So I was actually, like most of us, I'm sure, operating for validation because, you know, my father, good man, he meant well. He meant well, but, you know, he could only teach what he knew. He could only
Mm,
teach what had been exposed to him, what he had been exposed to, rather. You know, so he meant well, but, you know, let's say that if he had another opportunity, he probably would have done better. You know, and so he in order to encourage us, he would say some words, he would use things like, you know, very much like what you are talking about. You know, you would end up in the gutter. You know, you would end up in the gutter. I know they seem to like those kind of words, you know, and maybe in their own mind it will help you man up,
that's
you
how to
know, and
motivate.
everything, to motivate you to act, you know, not realizing that actually it was shutting you down, you know, and, you know, cutting everything around you, you know. So at some point, I gave up even ever trying to please my father. At some point, it didn't mean anything to me anymore because, you know, I felt as though no matter what it was I did, I would never ever, you know, be validated by this man in any way, really. So at some point, he just lost any meaning, and I wasn't ready to do that, you know. So, and one thing that had always been a problem for me was learning how to be balanced. So I would always take off from one extreme to the other extreme. And so, you know, I found myself, you know, smoking weed from the age of 13. At the age of 14, I already had a gun from 13, the age of 13, from 14, I had a gun in secondary school. From the age of 13, I was already visiting prostitutes, I was sleeping around with prostitutes, smoking weed, drinking, all sorts of things, making a blend, because there's this sense of emptiness. You want some validation, you want something that will enable you feel as though you are accomplishing something, and so you end up digging yourself further into a rut, digging yourself into a hole, and then you come out even more miserable. Then you now go back into the same things that got you miserable in the first place in order to drown your misery, and then and it was a vicious cycle. It's a vicious cycle going on and on and on and on and on, and like I said, I'm not blaming my dad, because I guess many fathers, if they knew better, will do better, which is why we are here to help ourselves and to help our fellow men, and even the ladies listening, the women listening, to help put things in perspective, So it's a very important point, We end up producing children that would end up, going out to their world to either become a problem or to become a solution. So it all depends on the perspective from where you are nurturing them and building them. So you see, you made mention of this, and I'd like to just quote what you said: the absent father wound as an ongoing emotional, social, or spiritual deficit, ordinarily met in a healthy relationship with the father. All right, so it's an ongoing, so it's present, continuous. It's not something that the season where the seeds were sown usually would be the period of childhood. But afterwards, the harvest precedes, will go on and, keep on pushing after childhood into adulthood. So we see it's usually broken children that produce broken men. Men are broken because they were broken as children. And then somehow you automatically assume that the person who has grown maybe should have outgrown certain things in their life, and so should make progress and should know that, and they should outgrow trauma, outgrow bad words, outgrow a negative opinion, outgrow a terrible self-image, and all these things that were kept in them, instituted in them, and underscored by the person who should have been speaking life out of them. Sometimes the father is actually present, but the fact that the father is present, if you notice, the focus of the absent father wound, by the definition you gave us, is it's an ongoing emotional, social, or spiritual deficit. There's really nothing mentioned about physical deficit. So it's very possible that the father is there, yet he's not there. Because he can be there, yet there is an emotional, a social, and a spiritual deficit happening in the life of that child. And because the father is not part of the child's life, they grow apart. And there is a void only a father can fill. And so we end up producing a lot of damaged men who are unwilling to admit the damage that has occurred in them. Now, I think of examples, and this is usually not an example that we would mention, because, we tend to view him in a positive light, and it's very true. He was one of the very best men who the Bible ever recorded. But when it concerns the way he conducted himself as a father, the Bible is not given for us to condemn anyone. The Bible tells us that whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning. Were written for our learning, so that we, through the consolation of the scriptures, might have hope. So it was written for our learning. So we're going to see the positive sides of these men and see the negative sides of the men, and so on and so forth. So for as good as as good a king as he was, as powerful a military leader, as powerful a military leader as he was, as adept in political rulership as he was, David had a problem in his fatherhood style. We find that David was an absent father. And when we look at David's fatherhood style, it would seem that it was largely, determined by his own childhood. Because obviously his father obviously played a role in who David eventually became, whether for good or for bad.
Yes, sir.
Because take a look at this. We find David knowing that David was a man of war. Most of what David accomplished through conquest. He was always on the move. He was always fighting. Right from the time when he was running from Saul, Saul spent a major part of the dying embers of his rule pursuing David. David lived as a fugitive for probably about 10 years or more. And he was running from pillar to post. It's hard for a person to be settled and concentrate at that point in time. So he was also moving as a hired hand, working for the king of Gath, the Philistines, and moving from place to place, moving all in a bid to avoid Saul. At some point, he even kept his family in a place called Ziklag while he was going on his military expeditions. Upon coming back, he discovered that the band of Amalekites had come and raided the whole camp, burnt the place down with fire, and took his wife and his children away. Now, those children obviously were like his first son, Amnon, was one of those children. There were others that were amongst them. I don't know if Absalom was there at that point. I would have to look through the scriptures to be able to remember if Absalom was there at that point. But you will see the same damage occur in Amnon. Something happened in Amnon. Because David was not there to give the commensurate level, the level of investment required. So there was obviously an emotional deficit. There was a social deficit. And obviously, definitely spiritual deficit. For Amnon to get up and to see his sister, Tamar, his half-sister, and that's who he wanted to marry, or he wanted to have sex with. So lustfully, he rapes her. And after raping her, we find that David's response also determined a lot of things afterwards. When you look at Absalom, all the characteristics of this wound that you speak about, you find, maybe apart from homosexuality, I don't know. If we look carefully, maybe you might find that there was something like that there. I don't know. Maybe there was none. I don't know. I really don't know. I'm not saying, but of course, not everybody who has the absent father wound tilts towards that. Of course not, I didn't tilt towards that. I'm sure you didn't, and a number of other people didn't as well. But you see, so, but at least I see the other ones are present in his life. When you think of anger and pain, that was definitely Absalom's lot. Absalom was very angry. He must have felt a sense of betrayal. His father allowed this guy, because David did not punish Amnon.
Yes,
David, it's not recorded that he punished Amnon.
True, sir.
He showed he was angry, but that anger didn't translate to any form of discipline, because Amnon was left alone. Amnon didn't do anything. Nothing was done to Amnon after violating and destroying a young lady's life. So Absalom harbored bitterness in his heart concerning the way David responded. He was very unhappy with David. Now, so what did Absalom do? Absalom took the law into his hands. Because you see, there was an emotional deficit. There was a social deficit as well. There was a deficit in Absalom's heart, as it was in Amnon's heart. The truth of the matter is that both those guys were victims.
Yes, sir.
They were victims
True, sir.
of a father who was also a victim. Because if you go back in David's own life, you begin to think of the mindset of his father, Jesse. Samuel came to Jesse's house, having been directed to go there to find a king. And then Jesse is asked by the prophet Samuel to assemble all his sons. And he brings Eliab first. Eliab is the big, handsome guy with six-pack and barrel chest and everything, charisma. And even Samuel was deceived and said, surely the Lord's anointed stands before him. And God says, don't consider this one, for I have rejected him. I have rejected him. So that means that God Almighty had considered him. For you to reject somebody, that means you had made an assessment. So God had assessed him and found that Eliab was not what he wanted. And so he set him aside. They brought Shammah, brought several others like that. And God rejected every one of them. And at that point, Samuel then asked, is there not another son? Are these all the sons you have left? So somewhere in Jesse's mind, David did not fit the bill. So that boy obviously would have had a sense of rejection from the beginning. He must have had a sense of rejection. There was something that was being communicated by the father to show David that he was not good enough. And only when Jesse was asked did he then say, oh, there is yet another, but that one takes care of the sheep. So he was only good.
He was an afterthought.
An afterthought. He was only good. He was only good to be kept by the backside of the desert to take care of sheep, while these other ones were the ones they could present. It was not a case of favoritism. It wasn't a case of favoritism like maybe Jacob had with Joseph. It was not a case of favoritism, So, I mean, if it were a case of favoritism, you are looking for somebody who will attain a position of prominence. Naturally, you want the favorite to attain that position. But David was completely overruled, completely forgotten, And so obviously there was something that was in him, possibly, that also pushed him to try and prove a point. That, if I'm not good in your eyes, I'm good in the eyes of others. I'm good in the eyes of God. I'm good in the eyes of my own destiny. He pushes himself, and that's a very good response. Not necessarily that you're trying to prove someone else wrong, but that you want to challenge yourself so that you will not be like what they said you are, and that's okay. But it would seem that David also carried certain things across in his own journey in fatherhood, because we find the way he raised Amnon. Maybe it was a determination to ensure that he did not raise his children the way his father raised him. Maybe it was that he was going to show them that he cared for them. But whatever the case was, that favoritism or that element of weakness he showed in his inability to bring discipline